Okay, so welcome to Module 3. Good morning, everybody. This is on personal safety. It's my second time recording, so I'm kind of grumpy because it didn't want to work the first time, so cross your fingers. So the objective of the module is to know your rights as an employee, be aware of unsanitary working conditions, how to travel to and from patients' homes, avoid any chemical hazards, and feel confident in potentially dangerous situations. So your rights as an employee, and let's talk about harassment. So we're obviously not going to do the classroom discussion. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration governed workplace safety standards. OSHA of 1970 ensures safe and healthful working conditions for working men and women throughout the country. This act is a law which requires that employers provide working conditions that are free of known dangers to their employees. OSHA sets the standard so employees can be safe on the job and have an outlet to voice grievances if they don't feel safe. Under the law, employees are also able to view their own medical records that are from the employer, review records of your exposure to toxic or harmful substances, review past safety grievances, and request that OSHA come and inspect your work environment should you feel it's not meeting safety requirements. As well as asking OSHA to inspect the workplace, you can also file a grievance and remain anonymous. Now, does that mean that you can file against McDonald's every day because you work there and you think that it's not safe or you don't like your boss? No, it doesn't work that way. So for more information, you can actually log on to www.osha.gov or you can call 1-800-321-OSHA. So let's talk about personal safety. Safety involves any kind of harassment. This includes sexual, ethnic, and even religious harassment. So your personal safety when you're in medicine, nursing, home health care is of the utmost. That's the employer's concern. So sexual harassment, patients and their family members may cross the employee-patient boundary when care is being provided. The legal definition of sexual harassment is unwelcome verbal, visual, or physical conduct of a sexual nature that is severe or pervasive and affects working condition or creates a hostile work environment. Remember the word unwelcome. Sexual harassment can be in various forms, verbal or written, which can be sexual-based jokes, comments about personal appearance, sexual innuendo, or even threatening a person. It can be physical, which is assault, inappropriate touch such as kissing, hugging, or stroking, nonverbal, looking up and down a person's body, derogatory gestures or facial expressions of a sexual nature, or it can be visual, posters, drawings, or emails of a sexual nature. So to clarify this sometimes can get very muddy. It's not about the person who's doing the act because they may feel that the behavior is okay. It's about the person who is the recipient of the act. So if you send me an email that I find inappropriate as an employee or as your patient, I may view it as inappropriate, sexually inappropriate, while you, the sender, may think that it was totally just funny. So be very, very cautious. This will actually serve you well as you grow and as you go into college and get your jobs. So you should report to your supervisor if you think you're being inappropriately spoken to or touched in a sexual manner. It's okay to hold patients' hands or to care about them, but it's very important to maintain the employee-employer-patient relationship. Sexual harassment can also happen in the office. Be certain to report anytime anyone touches you inappropriately, makes inappropriate sexual comments, or tries to offer incentives for sexual favors. This was big back in the 70s for women, where men would actually say, I'll give you a promotion if. This is no longer allowed. Let's talk about ethnic and religious harassment. So harassment about your race or your background or religion is not permitted. The best thing to do is to not discuss your religion or your race with your patients. Remember, everyone has their own beliefs that are right for them, and it's not your job to try to change them. So if anyone tries to harass you about your ethnicity or your religious beliefs, you also need to report that as well. So unfortunately, some of the homes a care aide will visit will not be free of pests or other unsanitary conditions. You need to report the following to your supervisor. They're listed: rodents, maggots, snakes, fleas, or roaches. They all create an unsanitary environment for both patients and employees. Sometimes we can help patients who have these types of situations as living environments, and sometimes we can't, but it's not your decision to make. Okay, it's also not your decision to change. So unsafe structural problems may also be a factor for you when you provide care for a patient. For example, do the floors give when you walk on them? Do they creak? Are there holes in the floor? Are there areas that are obviously rotten? Do the bathrooms function? Is there frayed wiring that's exposed? These all create an unsafe environment for you as well as for your patient. These are also times you need to notify the supervisor. So let's talk a little bit about personal safety. So you're actually going to do the activity on personal safety, which is personal safety crime statistics. You can see that on Edmodo. Let's talk about traveling safety. If anybody's ever seen Zain Saeed drive, you know he doesn't. So in order to remain safe while traveling to patients' homes, there are important safeguards to remember. Those being, don't deviate from your schedule. Your employer should know what patients you're seeing for the day. That way, if something happens, they kind of have an idea of where you might be. Know where you're going, plan your route, and keep a map. We have maps on our phones, which thank God. Keep your doors locked when you drive and your windows rolled up. If you have a cell phone, keep it with you. For those of you that have cell phones, if you actually have GPS tracking that can track your number, I know you don't want to give it to your parents and let them have access to it, but if you're working professionally, it's a smart thing to do so your employer can actually find you. It's recommended that you keep a half tank of gas in your car at all times because you just never know. If your car breaks down, you should turn on your flashers and call for assistance. Stay inside the car until you get help. So most of you carry purses and personal things with you, and you feel free to leave them in your vehicles. If you're taking care of somebody, you never know the environment. Always keep your personal things in the trunk. So let's talk about chemical hazards. So when you work in someone's home, there's always a risk. You work alone, you travel to different neighborhoods, you may have to work in high crime areas, and you work with stress and sometimes unstable families. When you're in a patient's home, it's always best to be aware of your surroundings. If a patient or family member becomes upset and starts to escalate, which means that they rapidly breathe, they start to shout, they swear, or you feel scared, you stay calm and alert, but make sure you find a way to get out. So as well as physical hazards, the home care aide should be aware of chemical hazards. You may come into contact with chemicals in patients' homes. These chemicals may seem common, like Ajax and Clorox, but they have serious side effects if they're not used properly. You need to be aware of chemicals that you're working with. You guys learned in Health Science 2 about the material safety data sheet. Those should be available to you if you have to use any chemicals. If you're in a home and you come across a product you've not used before, there is a policy at every agency that tells you what to do. It's also important to remember to never mix chemicals, leave chemicals unattended, never work with chemicals that aren't labeled, and if you're working with something in a closed area, you need to make sure that you have plenty of ventilation. Never pour undiluted bleach on anything. It mixes and it can produce toxic fumes. Always read the labels of things that you're using. And of course, we're not going to have that guest speaker from law enforcement, but it would be good to have someone come and talk about gangs. So, sometimes you go into homes and neighborhoods where there's violence, gangs, or drugs are a part of everyday life. That's not part of my everyday life, but you may know people who that's their life. It's the goal of the home care aide to safely attend to the patient while staying safe and unharmed. It's important to act calm and confident, but always to make sure you're observant. Be aware of your surroundings and know where the exits are, and always keep a path to a clear exit in case you feel unsafe. Be aware of any animals that are in the home, and if you're threatened by the animal or feel uncomfortable knowing there's an animal, you should always tell your supervisor. We can make arrangements for that. So let's talk about gangs. Gang activity, of course, you guys know, is on the rise. Gangs are recruiting younger and younger members. Some gangs thrive on drugs and violence, while others are nonviolent and they express themselves through graffiti. While your patient may or may not have gang connections, someone in the home that the patient lives in might. As well as a friend or a neighbor who visits the patient, they may also have gang ties. So it's important to kind of know the signs indicating possible gang activity. So I'm not telling you I'm an expert, but the experts say that the Bloods usually try to wear red, black, brown, or pink. They use numbers such as 031 or 021 to identify each other. Their rival gang, the Crips, use hand gestures and sayings, but their colors are typically blue, gray, orange, and purple. The Crips usually have a 6-pointed Star of David in a lot of their identification. There are also violent Latino gangs, which are growing and spreading across the country. The Latin Kings, their colors are black and gold. And then MS-13 or MSX3, oftentimes they wear blue and black, and they usually have heavy tattoos. If you're concerned about gang activity, don't attempt to discuss this with a patient or family members or try to talk them out of it. This is not your job to discuss their ethics and their decisions. Okay? You need to make sure that your supervisor knows and that you want to make sure that you're safe. If you're not safe, you can't care for somebody in their home. So similar to gang activity, there could be drug activity in a patient's home. And it may or may not directly involve the patient. If a patient or family member acts suspiciously or bans you from certain rooms of the house, they may be hiding drugs or paraphernalia. Likewise, if there are drugs being produced in the home, for example methamphetamine, there could be dangerous chemicals around the house that you could come upon. Meth labs are dangerous and the chemicals can explode very easily. If you find unlabeled pills, chemicals, or containers, avoid them, but you need to report it to the supervisor. Notice I didn't say you need to call police. You need to report it to the agency you work for. If your patient or patient's family members are involved in drugs or drug sales, they may try to protect their home with unsecured dogs. This could also be a risk to you. You have the right to ask to have the dogs tied up or crated or restrained so that you feel safe. If you suspect any drug activity in a patient's home, you must report it to a supervisor. So be safe out there when you guys get to working.